All right, everyone. So you might wonder what exactly happening right now. So you might be so confused. So let me make it clear once again. So let's get back to the authentication JSX. So every time whenever the user trying to log in, right? We need to make sure before going into the authentication screen, we need to make sure whether the user is already logged in or not. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom hook to check that user informations, right? Because if the user is authenticated, we need to fetch it only one time and we need to use it globally everywhere. So that's the best way to use it. So that's the reason we are using the React Query client. So React Query client, it helps us to create a custom hook by using the use query parameter over here, use query hook. We can able to create ourselves a custom hook. So I create a user as a custom hook inside the hooks folder, and using that use query, that will gives four different objects called data, is loading, is error, and refetch, right? So we created the custom state called user, and inside the custom state we are going to call this API function. So this function inside this API folder, we have a call get user detail. So basically this get user detail, it's going to return a promise. So we are trying to fetch the user credential by using the on auth state change, and we are trying to fetch that information. If that data is there, we are console logging it instead of returning it. If the data is not there, we are rejecting that promise by raising an error as user is not authenticated. So this will be returned and that will be stored in the state. Okay, and that will trigger this like something went wrong, something like that. So this is the user state. So we can use this is loading state because every time whenever the use React Query client is triggering this function, this use state, this particular is loading property will be true. So we can use this as a property. If that is loading is true, we can load some animation, and if that is false, we can get back to the data. So that's what I'm trying to say over here. So now since the data is successfully printed in the console, now what we have to do is we have to push this data to the where we need to push this data to our Firebase. That's what we need to do now, right? Since we already enabled that what is that, we already enabled that Firestore and everything. All we have to do is to write the code to directly push this user data into our Firebase collection. So I'm inside here, I'm going to create another listener event. So let's say const unsubscribe. It's another event. On subscribe is equal to on snapshot change, on snapshot. So basically on snapshot is it's a listener, like a document snapshot. It will constantly listen to that specific collection, whether the data is being modified or deleted or a new data is being inserted. So that's the listener we are trying to create over here. Inside this listener, I'm going to create a doc, and I'm going to use the DB object which is coming from the Firebase, which we configured in our Firebase config.js. Then I'm going to create a new collection called users, and I'm going to create user data dot uid. We are going to use that user ID to create it as an ID field for that specific doc. After this doc, I'm going to call a callback function. So I'm going to get that doc information underscore doc. So what we are trying to do over here is we are trying to fetch that user information. If that user is already there in that user collection, we need to fetch that. If that user is not there, then we need to create that user into our collection. So over here from this doc in this user collection, we are trying to fetch this information, right? If that it's having the doc information, if that doc is exists, so here over here, if underscore doc is dot exists, which means that data is already inside. So all I have to say resolve underscore doc that data, we are returning that data. If not, we need to insert. So set doc is a custom method which is coming from the Firestore, and I'm going to use the same doc, copy this, set doc db users user data, and right after that we need to supply the data which you want to insert. We have that user data over here, that object, we are sending that object for this particular ID. If everything is inserted successfully, that will returns the promise. Inside this promise, I'm resolving it, and I'm sending the user data back. Save these changes, and now we need to call this unsubscribe method right after here. Return, we need to close that unsubscribe listener event. So unsubscribe, save these changes. Now the unsubscribe event is cleared. Let me explain this code one more time. So we are creating a new promise and we are using the on auth state message. We are creating an unsubscribe event outside, and we are making sure on using the on auth state, we are making sure whether we are getting the user credential or not. If we have the user credential, then we need to make sure whether that logged in user is already registered in our website or not. So we need to make sure whether the data is already inside that collection array or not. So if that collection, so how we are making sure, right? By using the doc property, we are trying to fetch that user information by using that ID. If that ID already exists, then we are sending that data. If not, we are creating a new user for that specific ID, and we are supplying that user data to store it in our collection. Then we are sending it back. So we need to stop this inner listener event, and of course we need to stop the outer listener event to stop the memory leaks. So this is what's happening right now. So save these changes. Now if you refresh this, so it will return back the user to the home screen. The reason is because it's happening. So over here we return this condition if it is not loading, which means this is not loading now, and of course it's having some data in it. So that's the reason it's navigating the user to the home screen. So every time when the user is trying to authenticate himself forcefully through the URL, if I hit enter, so that will take some time and it will push the user back to the home screen. So but we are not supposed to display this UI. So to do that, to avoid doing that, what we need to do, we need to bring that loader. So that's the reason we install the spinner, right? React spinners to bring that custom loader animations and everything. So to bring that React spinners and everything, so what we can do is, so one second, let's go ahead and create a custom component, name it as main spinner.jsx rafce, and inside here let's export it main spinner. Copy this, paste it, save the changes, close it, and inside here this should occupy the entire screen. So it should take the screen width the screen, and hatch screen, and flex item center, and justify center. And inside here what we are going to do is, I'm going to bring the puff loader. So basically this puff loader is coming from your React spinners. If you search for React spinners, click the React spinners, so, and click the demo page, and there you can see the different kinds of spinner animations over here. So in this case we are using this one, this puff loader. So for this puff loader, I'm just going to change the color as hash 498 FCD, and the size of this is going to be 80. Save this change. So now all I have to do is to get back to the authentication screen. So right after this hook, so if it is loading, that means if the query client is loading, that means it's trying to fetch the data, and if it's trying to do something, then all I have to do is to return this main spinner from the components screen, from the components where it is. Yeah, main spinner, it's imported in a single line. So now save the changes, and now if I get back to the auth screen, hit enter, you can screen this loader and loading animation, and it will push back the user to the home screen. You will not see that UI. So this is what we try to implement it. And since you can see we have the state, if you click the state, and you can see we have the data in our state. So now whenever I need the user data, all I have to do is to copy this, and I can directly access this user information wherever I need inside the child. Okay, so that's how we will authenticate ourselves and to get that information and to store it in the query client, and as well as we need to make sure whether the data is inserted in the cloud or not. Let's get back to the Firestore database. Go to the Firestore collections, and there we have the user collection, and there we have the ID. and there we have our user information. So we successfully implemented the query client to manage our state, and as well as we successfully saved our user informations in our Firestore collections. How cool is that? And now all we have to do is to create this header component and display that user information and display that sign in functionality. And that's what we are going to do next.